myself? And where are all my people? All right, good afternoon. This is Dr. Nsenga Burton. Thank you for joining me today. We are about to have a very good discussion that we've been talking about all day. Thank you. And here are my people. So I was like, uh-oh, where did everybody go? Welcome on behalf of this fantastic group of people, Dr. Cunningham, Professor Phill Branch, and Dr. Mark Cunningham. Welcome to today's show, which was previously supposed to run last week, but we had to reschedule due to the whirlwind that happened. I don't even know how to describe it, Mark, in Texas. The devastation that happened in Texas. Can you give us a little bit of an update about where things stand now, Mark?
Well, there's still some people here with no water, and that's the biggest thing is the water now. So the electricity and stuff is back. There are some people I know that are still struggling with that too, but the biggest thing is water. We were under a boil notice for a while, and now we're able to drink the water out of the faucet now and stuff. So after a week of people melting snow and to flush their toilets and all this other stuff, it's just been, as a friend of mine said, we all earned our Boy Scout and Girl Scout badges here in Texas this week. So
very good. I'm not sure if you all can hear me. Right now you can't hear me? Great, because I can't hear anything. So I'm going to stop talking and let you talk. So I'm glad to hear that things are getting better, Mark. I mean, of course it was mishandled. We got a problem with how government responds to these types of atrocities, and we need to do better. But today we're here to talk about Janet Jackson. And Miss Jackson, if you're nasty, now listen, y'all people, don't cancel me. That is an intertextual reference to a song. Okay? So don't be canceling me because I called her nasty. She called herself nasty. It's a reference to a song. So we're here to talk about Janet Jackson today, all things Janet. I don't know if you can see my shirt. Here's my shirt. Here we are. And everybody else is wearing their shirt. Kanika, sorry, Dr. Bell didn't have hers. But we are all.
Kanika Bell can't fit her shirt because it's too old.
Full disclosure, we're all Janet Jackson fans. So let's start with Mr. Professor Branch, who is teaching a course right now on Janet Jackson. Why don't you start us off and let us know why do you think, and the course is about gender and identity and all those things that you talk about in your scholarship and in your actual work. But can you talk to us about your class?
Of course. Good afternoon, everybody. So we're teaching a course. I'm teaching a course at Goucher this semester, Goucher College, that looks at Janet Jackson, her artistry. I think I want to say that because I think that's important to say. We're looking at her artistry as well as the impact that she has had in terms of pop music, the impact she's had on culture overall, as we look at women and Black people in the music industry. And so because I'm teaching students who, many of whom they don't remember Janet Jackson from the Control era or, anything like Rhythm Nation, maybe not even Velvet Rope. They're just coming to her in some instances. I'm having to go backwards a little bit to create this context for who Janet Jackson is and who she is for the culture. And that's been fun, kind of having them get caught up with that, some of them who didn't know, and then making a point to teach them sort of the ways in which they can apply what we learn about through her career, about how she, in a time when music was segregated, and we're looking at the 80s, we still had Black music charts. We still had Black awards at the award shows, right? Then you have Janet, who is not doing super poppy music with Control, break through and have this hit album on the pop charts. So I'm giving them the context that it wasn't just a Jackson who came in and had hits. It was a woman who came in doing a sound that was Black and crossing over and doing really well with that in an era where artists like Lionel Richie and Whitney and other artists were being asked to strip down some of their authenticity in order to kind of have that same level of success. So it's part history lesson about the music industry and also grounding in who Janet Jackson is and her importance in the industry. And then later on in the semester, we plan to kind of work our way to the Super Bowl. But since Justin apologized, we jumped a little bit ahead and we've been talking a little bit about that apology.
You're muted, I think.
But yeah, the policy is what you would call important to talk about. But before we do that, let's keep talking about Miss Jackson, if you will. So when we think about Janet Jackson and what she represents, right, and what she has represented to African American communities over the course of her career, from Penny, before that, the Black Mae West, but from her time as Penny on Good Times all the way through her trajectory, 2019 being inducted finally into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. What do we think? Like, how do we tell people about the magnitude of her influence and impact on our community? Dr. Bill.
Well, first of all, I'm a huge Janet fan. Signs my t-shirt today because, again, I can't fit my Janet t-shirt, but that's how long I've been a Janet fan. I actually used to wear her outfits and stuff to school. It was great, lots of shoulder pads and whatnot. But I think, Janet Jackson stood out in this family full of men, right? People knew about the Jackson 5, and it was like, oh, the Jackson 5 has a little sister, right? And she fought for her own space to be this huge megastar outside of this family full of men, outside of just being the little sister to arguably the largest pop star that has ever lived. And I think for someone to just claim some space like that is totally awesome. But for it to be a Black woman, an unashamedly Black woman, as Janet Jackson was, and always will be, I think that's what makes her so grand. Who didn't want to be Janet Jackson? Janet Jackson was on the list of the fine Black women forever. There are still Black men who are like, I got J-Lo, I got Janet Jackson. People are still saying that. She is still holding place as being beautiful, as being talented, and really just, fighting for her own space where she could have really been shadowed. I mean, she was one of the Jacksons, for Pete's sake.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Dr. Cunningham?
Man, I mean, you kind of spoke to what I was going to say, Kanika, about brothers of my generation. I mean, those of us, I'm 50, and those of us in that generation of brothers that just, Janet was our woman, and we used to fight about that. No, she my woman. No, she my woman. And to this day, you literally, I mean, and to this day, I mean, we still, like you say, still claiming her in that way. But, she represented, I mean, just this level of beauty that she had, her skill as a dancer. She was just a whole package. And when Control, I mean, I remember liking, when she being on Solid Gold when she was singing Young Love, and then You Don't Stand Another Chance and all that stuff. And then when Control came, it was like, ooh. I say for brothers, for me in particular, the pinnacle, the pinnacle of Janet Jackson fineness is that Pleasure Pencil video. Where she put them knee pads on, them getting things on, and that hair was, and that, oh my God. Ooh. I just can't even, I can't even put it in words.
Look at Dr. Cunningham fanning out. Look at him. Okay.
I was going to,
he deserves it.
This used to hang over my bed.
Oh my goodness! That's the All For You album cover.
Yes.
That used to hang over my bed until I said I got a certain age. I'm really kind of too old to have that over my bed, so it's in my office. So, yeah, it just,
oh my God!
She will never ever.
I like it.
She'll never.
You are a super fan, and I think we're all super fans of Janet Jackson on this panel, right? So this is why I invited you. Because we know her music. We grew up with her music. We've seen her in concert. My best friend and I had my best friend won ticket to a Janet Jackson concert. We had front row seats at the Cap Center in DC when we were teenagers. And that's one of the best memories I ever have in life. That's the first time out of the 5 times I've seen Janet Jackson in concert. But so I think she means something. She's, to those of us of a particular age. And I think for young women who were coming up at that time, she was definitely a role model in terms of someone who was at the top of her game. She's decidedly different from other people, even though Whitney Houston is still one of my favorites. Love her to death, but she was very different from Whitney Houston. Her presentation, the type of music that she did, and her music, even though it was pop, it was still very much connected to the R&B tradition from the very beginning. And then, of course, her continuous work, and then her work, with John Singleton and Poetic Justice, and then, she's also worked with Tyler Perry recently, and Eddie Murphy in the Nutty Professor movie, the second Nutty Professor 2. So she's had that kind of career, and then, of course, Fame and Debbie Allen, who is the queen of dance. But Janet Jackson really represents that female empowerment, right? Her story of taking control of her life, control of what she says, control of what she does, separating herself from her family, which was very tight knit, very clannish. They were a very religious family, much like the Osmonds and those families of that time period. So really separating herself, stepping out, even casting Janae Dubois in her Control video as her mother, who played Walona Woods, rest in peace, fantastic actress and singer and dancer. But casting her in that music video. So, Janet Jackson, I think for women, particularly of our age group, represents that first time that somebody breaks out and says, I'm in control of my body. I'm in control of what I say. My mouth, which is an extension of the body. I can be sexy and coy and all of these things and still be a good person. Not be demonized because I am sexy or sexual. Not be demonized because I like who I like. And not be demonized because I surround myself or I pick and choose who kind of gets to come into my world. You don't get to tell me who gets to come into my world. So she was definitely a symbol. It still is, I would argue, a symbol of female empowerment, women's empowerment. We don't say female too much anymore, but women's empowerment at this particular junction.
Can I say something that what we often lose in context, and this is, for people watching who may not be super fans or into pop music history, is that there was only one, right? Right now we live in a time where you can have a Rihanna, a Beyonce, and several other artists who can fill stadiums, be Black women and fill stadiums and sell millions of records. Janet was, and I'm not saying there weren't other pop artists, of course there were, but Janet was the only, if you had to equate, she was the only, would have been the only Beyonce of her time, right? Like there was nobody else. There was no other show in town. And for a long time, until and really until the Super Bowl. Right? Because if you're thinking about it, even though Beyonce had started her solo career, Janet was still expected to sell millions of records of her albums at that time. It wasn't until they completely shut her down that she did not. There was not a natural decline based on her getting older, less interest. It went from her having millions of albums sold, tons of airplay, to no airplay. That is what accounts for the decline in record sales. It was not a natural decline. So what we have is somebody who, for a very long time, like you said, was at the top of, and for many years, the only person doing what she was doing that type of music. Tina Turner is doing rock and roll. It's a different thing. And for Janet, if you went to a Janet concert in, my first show was Rhythm Nation. I'm wearing my 1990 t-shirt, but I'm not going to stand up because you'll see my stomach. But from here on, I can still be 1990.
I was second in.
Oh, no, you're not going to see that. But I got it on though for you. So the thing is, we don't often talk about the ways in which the fact that she was that popular to all audiences. Her concerts were not all Black people. Her concerts were diverse, right? Largely, and there weren't artists like that who were mega pops. Madonna, even though I listened to Madonna music, when you went to a Madonna concert, it wasn't like you're going to see the Rainbow Coalition of people the way you saw Janet Jackson, even though we listened to Madonna's music. Janet was the only person who was doing that. And I'm not even talking about Michael. That's a whole other stratosphere.
I think you make a really good point in talking about that. I mean, I remember like the All For You album, opening week sold like over 600,000 copies. And then when the Super Bowl happened, and then, the Demita Joe album, which I think is a still incredibly underrated album.
Fantastic album.
But even on the string, even after they tried to take her down, I mean, Demita Joe still sold over 200,000 copies the first week, only second behind, I think, Usher's Confessions album. And you know, I mean, even the power of that, like even in them trying to take her, get her down, right? Her fan base, right, is so significant that she can still have the #2 album after all of that, right? I mean, and then go on to that, you know, and then of course we know the album sales are declining for everybody because of the state of the industry, but her the power of that I think is sorely underestimated as well, for sure.
They can sell 200,000 5 years ago with Unbreakable.
Absolutely, with Unbreakable, yeah.
You know, after the Super Bowl with no promotion really, other than a video dropped on Twitter one day, right? So that speaks to something.
Yeah.
And that's interesting too, because and this is going to dovetail to move us right into cancel culture. But when I was reading about a lot about what happened with Les Moonves and CBS, because Janet got really caught up in that movement. But apparently, and this is based on what I was reading in different legitimate publications, was that Les Moonves like really had an axe to grind. It was like, listen, you know, I'm going to shut her down. We don't want her performing at the Grammys, because all these, you know, products or events were shown on CBS. There's CBS's signature event, and so it's all connected, whether it's the Super Bowl, whether it's the Grammys, or what have you. And so this idea that Moonves would take her down and then really block her for years from appearing on CBS because of this one incident while elevating Justin Timberlake. And that's, you know, I started out purposely. Let me just tell you my reasons for starting out purposely of celebrating Janet Jackson, because I did not want to come into this discussion elevating what happened with Justin Timberlake and his weak apology. He tried his apology above all the wonderful things that she did. So I want to privilege her first, and now we can get into this conversation.
But you know what makes her such a badass where that's concerned too, is that, you know, she was supposed to be on the Grammys to do that tribute to Luther Vandross at the time, and you know, Justin Timberlake went and apologized again, and Janet was like, I did that once, I'm not doing it again. Like I mean, and I just was like, oh, that's why she's so bad. Because I mean, because she, you know, she's, I've done it once, I'm not going to keep kissing the ring, so to speak. I don't have to do that. And you know, and you know, even, you know, for Les Moonves, right, like you say again, to really also be, I think, more upset with the fact that she didn't kowtow to him, right? Is the ultimate in Black empowerment to me in a lot of ways, in things that to me, that's just as significant as other things that she did, that she was like, no, I'm not going to be profusely apologetic for something that clearly was an accident, you know.
Her integrity around that situation. I mean, if you didn't already love Janet Jackson, right? I mean, I think even the fact that she chose, she was on that Oprah show. Do you all remember when she was on the Oprah and you know, Oprah was trying to tactfully say, you know, do you feel like you were thrown under the bus? There was like a way even that she handled that. And I felt like she was talking about more than Justin Timberlake. Even then when she said that, you know, it was kind of like, you know, sometimes people are your friends, but I don't remember exactly what people are your friends, some aren't. And she wasn't just talking about Justin Timberlake. I think she was talking about some other industry folks, like, you know, I've been in this game for a very long time, you know, and you know, and I, you know, for me to then be painted in a particular light and then treated in a certain way, you know, here is Janet Jackson being treated like, you know, and it kind of got into that. It's reminiscent of what happens to Black women, you know, at times, just suddenly now, oh, you out here being kind of a hoe. And so we're just, you know, now we need to distance ourselves from you. And I just, her handling of it, because I do think most other people would go all the way live, would have gotten quite a few press, you know, the situations together so that they can go in and not only clear their name, but name names of other people who were absolutely wrong in the treatment, in her treatment. And I just felt like she was so stately. You know? She was
and not able to be goaded too. There were lots of news instances well after that tried to goad her into talking about, and she didn't take the bait at all.
And now with that, you know, that kind of blended apologies, sort of acknowledging privilege, something that he's, you know, released, and you're kind of like, okay. And even now, not being goaded into it. You know, she now is not being baited into getting back into that.
I think an important conversation around Janet, as we talk about how her community, you use the word community, Black community, and how the community has embraced her, is also we have to look at the flip side of that, is that because we don't own nothing. I'm not saying that broadly, right? We might have, as fans, as people in our living rooms, been like, you know how they treat Black folks, right? We know how this happened to me at work. You know what I'm saying? We've all been in situations where we've been thrown under the bus in some kind of way. We know that race is the undercurrent of it. But I distinctly remember there wasn't a very vocal support of Janet Jackson coming from even Black people in the music industry or Black executives. She wasn't on the Black radio stations either, not the new music.
With the exception of Jermaine Dupri, who she was dating at the time, who actually stepped down from his role in ASCAP.
Right. Yeah, he did. Right. I remember that. I remember her partner, her friend, somebody who she would have, but largely no. Yeah. Right. Now, I think that would look different in 2021. I think there's a little bit more agency, and because of social media, people are, like Dr. Bell said, apt to clap off, because there's not the same publicist filters like there used to be. But I think you can look at Chris Rock telling jokes about Janet. Nobody wants to see Janet's 40-year-old titty, in his comedy special, and people laughing.
That's why, yes, they do. But okay,
that's a lie.
Yes, they do.
50-year-old ones too. So I understand.
Right, but he made fun of her. But he made fun of her from a largely Black audience that laughed, and then you have in 2008 the ESPYs, and if you haven't seen this clip. And I had not watched it in a while. Justin Timberlake, 4 years after the incident, is doing a whole routine about Janet and the incident while he's being applauded by a room full of people, women and men. And it's kind of like, this is, no one spoke about that afterwards, like this was unnecessary. So what we see happen to a lot of Black artists is over time, I think we settle down and we kind of go back and we let them back in. I don't think Janet ever really lost us. I think we just didn't have the power and didn't use our voices in the way that we should have. And the people in those positions, I just think they did not. She was never canceled from us, I don't think. You can see Janet Jackson make her every couple of years appearance at the BET Awards, and people get on their feet just because she walked into the room. That's not somebody who's canceled, but I think you have to stop privileging. They looked away. They can look away. They could not. I think what Dr. Cunningham said is they couldn't cancel her. She was still selling records. It's just racism. It was just really racism and sexism. Period.
We also didn't cancel Justin Timberlake. I mean, we didn't. We didn't.
We actually embraced him.
We held him up.
Right. We not turn that anger towards him, or at least some responsibility towards him.
I remember talking about this when this first happened. I remember telling people about this and talking about, and I'm not saying I was I started this, no, but I was, having these conversations with people, and I remember people shutting me down, going man, you just like Janet Jackson. That's the only reason you say that. And I'm like, no,
I got that a lot too.
There's something not right about this, right? And people were man, they just kind of dismissed me as being the kind of overzealous fan or whatever else. And then all of a sudden, the dialogue started to shift and started to change. People used to give me a hard time because to this day I have no use for Justin Timberlake, none. None. I have no use for him. And but I just kind of remember people, like you were saying, Professor Branch, people just kind of dismissing it as and not coming to her defense or sticking up for her the way that we should have. That now, because everybody is conscious and everybody is woke now, whatever else, now that we're on it. But even this old backhanded apology that he gave, which to me, had he not been pressured about Britney, he just got, to me, it was a two for sale. You just lump Janet into that, right? Because you had opportunity to apologize, Janet. We've been calling for you to do that for years, and you never did. But they pissed you off, pissed off about Britney, and so now Janet while I'm in here, and to me that didn't mean a thing. But
absolutely,
it didn't mean anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And this whole idea, first of all, let's just say this and make this plain. Janet Jackson didn't need to display her breast to get clout or fame or pub.
Or to be a sex symbol.
Period.
Thank you.
Or to be a sex symbol.
She was still on Mark Cunningham's wall without having her breast out.
Look at him. Exactly.
Right.
Still over his bed.
And that Janet album, Rolling Stone cover had already been out.
Exactly. So she didn't need to do that. And I'm not saying anybody needs to do it. You can choose to do that, whatever you want to do. But the way they were talking about her at the time of the incident, and I did write about it, and I was like, she is a superstar. She does not need to unveil her left breast or whatever breast it was in order to gain fame. She is already famous 10 million times over. So this had to be about something else. And I do think, I agree with you, Mark. I think we were definitely having these conversations within the academy, right? Unfortunately, we have these conversations and let them get out into the world outside of our own world. And you did see some people who were talking about it out in the popular press. But by and large, many people just kind of were quiet and did let it go by. And so when we think about this apology of Justin Timberlake, who went on that, at the Grammys that year, performed 4 different times that year at the Grammys when she was banned. And they were using the language, Janet Jackson is banned. The press release says banned from the Grammys, right? When they were like, oh, you can't play her music on the radio. We have to punish this free Black woman. Because that's what she was, right? She even broke free of the Jackson clan, like this free Black woman, for doing this thing. Whether she did it on purpose or not, I do believe it was an accident because she didn't need to do it. But whether you think that or not, she's a free Black woman. She can do what she wants to do. And even if she did it, she didn't do it alone. And the treatment of her and Justin Timberlake, and the unequal treatment of her, and in fact, just trying to really kick her while she was down, versus elevating her, and him like literally, stepping on her to get up to where he became a superstar. Because Justin Timberlake was definitely famous. He was a breakout star from NSYNC. We get all of that, or what have you. But he was not who he is now until after that incident. Exactly. So when you look at his rise, and I won't say her fall, but the diminishing value of her on the market, it was a decline, and that is a telltale sign or emblematic of how of what happens to Black women's bodies when they engage with these what I call dominant media industry. Right? You either get on board and you put out more of the same, and if you don't, then you are punished. Period. That's what it is, even in 2021.
That Burton, it reminds me a little bit, and it's not necessarily. She wasn't punished for it. I think about the way, for example, the way Adrian Brody, when he accepted the Oscar for Halle Berry, and the way he just, the way that he kissed her, the way he did that, and I'm thinking he wouldn't have done that to Meryl Streep.
Right? No.
The way Black women's bodies, particularly in juxtaposition to these young white men, right, and the preference of their space, or their body, or something, or their stature, and the way that we diminish Black women's body. I mean, we see that kind of happen all the time, and we kind of brush it off, or we treat it like this is not anything. We don't take it too serious or whatever, but this is in fact very, very serious, and has been happening entirely too long for us, for us to kind of continue to not speak on this stuff, and kind of, we're trying to correct every other wrong. Why are we not doing that? I think for the same thing in terms of Black women's bodies.
And Dr. Bell, can you talk more about the policing of Black women's bodies historically, and how that kind of dovetails with media?
I was just talking about this actually in a talk at a college yesterday about this juxtaposition between this over-sexualization of the Black woman's body, and then also this extreme pressure to be chaste. And that we have both of these images, right? And somehow Black women are supposed to pull off both of them, right? Still supposed to be kind of video vixen type, can fulfill that stereotype, but then also be able to be taken to your home church and not have sex before marriage. Like, we're supposed to somehow pull this all off in one vein. And I think that was, Dr. Cunningham was absolutely correct. There was something usury about her body. I believe it was accidental, certainly on her part. I think my jury might be out on whether or not it was accidental on his part, if you feel me. And so he definitely did not accidentally gain fame and then use that as cachet to grow as an artist, and even as kind of a personal figure. He became the white man who was invited to the cookout, so to speak, kind of after that incident. And I think that was even more proof of how we commodify Black women's bodies. It actually it's actually literally a form of currency. Right. And so not only are we bartering and selling it itself as the body, but then also using it to gain status. And we see it, you know, in countless examples, but his was really something. He wasn't just on, you know, the Grammys and things like that. He was like on BET. I mean, he was on Black. I mean, you know, he was just like
along with Black artists.
He was an honorary Black man for some time, and possibly it was because you got a chance to get your hands on Janet Jackson's ticket, whatever that was, you know. But that somehow that was the essence of the commodification of a Black woman's body. I can use it to grow myself professionally.
I agree. Like I hear that, and I think about what is sad for me and overwhelming is that it is how we are all used, right? You know, I have spent much of my career as an academic being the cool professor who comes in and can get hundreds of kids to show up for classes that are meant for 15, and people standing around wanting to hear what I have to say, but being told what I have to offer is not tenure worthy. Well, these 300 people in this room might disagree, but you know, it is how we are all commodified and then dismissed when it's time for people to pay up, and whatever the pay is, right? And I think that it's hard for me. There's something that happened. I was at the Soul Train Awards one time many moons ago, and Don Cornelius, I was a PR person, and Don Cornelius was in the back. It was before the show started. He was really angry. And I had known enough to kind of, when people look, it had nothing to do with me, but I backed up. But what I heard him say to somebody he was working with was he was pissed off because some of the artists were starting to show up dressed like they had just rolled out of bed. We're going to go play basketball, whatever. And he said, the Grammys, I think they used to do the Soul Train Award the day before the Grammys, just because they knew the artists were already there that same weekend. And they knew that people would come for the Grammys and then would also come to Soul Train. You know, so it was kind of, let's piggyback on them already being here as one plane ticket. And I remember him being upset saying, they're not going to show up to the Grammys looking like that. You know what I'm saying? It is like, how do we even value ourselves, right? Like that, Justin Timberlake getting that pass is also us not believing we have the power to do otherwise, right? And there's a historical context for that because we haven't always had it, right? And I think, you know, if we look at pop music now, R&B artists, they're all still, for the most part, skinny, right? You know, we have to celebrate Jasmine Sullivan or Lizzo for making it while not being bone thin. It's still ridiculous. They just look like people, right? So we're still in this thing where our bodies are we're expected to look like this thing that we shouldn't have to look like and be this other thing. And when for people who break out of that, people who decide, I don't care, I'm just going to be me, they're in the margins. Fantasia is doing independent music right now. Fantasia could be on a label selling. She has an amazing voice. She's making her own music. And I love that she said, I'm going to make the music I want to make and pay myself. If I sell 100,000 copies, so be it, because I know my fans are going to show up on tour. So you're seeing some of that ownership come back. But in terms of these systems, we're still being asked to look like them, sound like them, and do what they tell us to do, or else we don't get the same benefits.
And be used by them.
Right.
One of the benefits that we don't get, Phil, these are all great points that you all are raising, is that Black women don't get the ability, and I think it's all Black people, but definitely Black women, to reinvent ourselves either. So, you know, like you had mentioned Madonna earlier. Madonna has been Spanish, African,
like the Mighty Phoenix,
Asian, British, whatever, whore, slut, virgin. I mean, everything. Like, and she just really is able to remake herself in many different ways. And I feel like Black women, and it's not a feeling, it is actually true. Especially Black women music artists are not granted that same type of ability. I mean, look at Sierra, the hell she catches from the Black community. A lot of Black people in the Black community, Black men, especially, for trying to reinvent, right, her life, right, post the person that she was engaged to and had a baby with. I don't even want to start.
Right.
I don't even want a news bite of that. But just this inability for Black women to reinvent themselves. So, you know, Janet Jackson can't go from Kimberly Brown says that other than Kim Phillips and Tootie, Janet Jackson and Charmaine on Different Strokes was the only Black female teen I saw on a hit TV show in the 80s, and she represented well. Right. So Janet Jackson, you know, she was able to make herself over from the kind of like teen TV, you know, kind of popcorn music or pop music star, who was like a cursory star. You know, she's a Jackson to being one of the Jacksons, breaking out, having her own identity or what have you. She was able to do that within the confines or the construct of being a Jackson, being black, being a black woman or what have you. But when she started to adopt that kind of hypersexual identity, which is probably something that the let's keep it real record companies probably wanted her to do as well, and to kind of embrace that side of herself or whatever. She was punished for it, and that's what happens to Black women artists who do that. They very rarely can go back, right, or they can reinvent themselves. Even her, living abroad and marrying a Muslim man, very wealthy Muslim man, and all of this has not done anything really to change the way that she has come back to us as an artist. And so I think that what you say, Phill, is completely correct. It's we don't have the space and the room to just be in general, and Black women specifically, because people are so used to policing our bodies and telling us who we can be and what we can be and how long we can be that and what we should be doing at different stages of our life, don't get that ability to reinvent ourselves. So even this post Super Bowl incident, wardrobe malfunction with Janet Jackson, she was never given the opportunity really or really celebrated when she literally was really trying to reinvent herself and reinvent her life in a way that really challenged these ideas of who she was relative to what they were saying about her, as opposed to who she might have thought she was or wanted to be or present herself in the industry.
Yeah, I think you're really right about that reinvention. I mean, because one of the things I love about Janet is, and I think Dr. Bell, you mentioned this too, and and at the risk of being cliche saying it like this, but the way that I think it's kind of been overlooked, even in the midst of her, because what she does in the midst of embracing this sexual self is she's always, even in the midst of that, very much so apologetically Black, right? And I think this gets overlooked about her, because I think about like a song like New Agenda on the Janet album with Chuck D, where she specifically mentions the word African American woman standing tall with pride, and then she on the Velvet Rope album where she's using the Africanism, in the God Till It's Gone video, and then the secret song of on It Would Used to Be on Velvet Rope, Can't Be Stopped, where she is specifically talking about being born of blood of kings and queens and can't be stopped. I mean, all of that stuff is, and even back to Control, embracing that Minneapolis sound and all of this stuff that is distinctively Black, right? Even in the midst of embracing that sexuality. But I really think nobody else, like we've mentioned here before, nobody was really doing that. And it really striking to me that how is it that you get to legendary status like she is and still be underrated? And still, how you be an underrated legend?
When you're a Black woman.
That's such a good question. Yeah.
I mean, an underrated legend. I mean, and
they don't count us as audience members, right? They might care about the artist, but us as we're often taught that without crossover, without their eyes, without white gaze, you are nothing. So you can be selling millions of records.
All of that though.
I know.
But even amongst us, I'm not even talking about white folks. Like I don't even trip about white folks, because I expect more out of us when it comes to us than I do them. And I'm just saying that again, that here she is, legendary. I mean, even I think about when BET did the best dancers list, and she's like number 4 behind her brother and James Brown. When I'm just like, look at that. She was 3 or 4. Anyway, I think she was 4. But I mean, all of this stuff. I mean, people are aware, right, of it. But the credit, like I say again, that's what I call her, an underrated legend. That she can have amassed all of this, we can count it off, the stuff that she's done, and still that even amongst us, right, we still just kind of speaking in this kind of reductive ways. Or
who's telling the story? But who tells the story? And that's part of what we did. My first class, we talked about. There's a couple of articles about her being underrated. One in the New York Times that I'll send to you. They keep calling her underrated, and I'm like, again, I think it's about who they believe, who's watching, and who cares to use that language. And for the wider sense, for us. I think when you're talking about how Black women's bodies are sort of seen and manipulated, I think just as Black as a Black audience, as a Black artist, we're often forced to, man or woman, to kind of play in a certain Black lane. So she is not a traditional soul artist. So within our own audiences, even though she's done everything that she's done, people are saying things like she can't sing like Aretha, she can't sing like Patty, right? That's dismissive because she's not doing typical soul music. So she never gets mentioned in the pantheons of other Black artists, right? Because she doesn't have that voice, but there's so many other things that she has. So of course she's dismissed in those conversations because we also take on some of the language that limits, because, for instance, Justin Timberlake, Taylor Swift, whoever else, they can go off and write a folk album when they want to feel and they express themselves, and they come back in Gwen Stefani and start doing a robot. They can do that. Janet couldn't go write a folk album to express her. Like, that's not what's going to happen. I think we wouldn't want it. We wouldn't buy it as a mass audience, and they don't want it from us either. I think for Janet, the underrated piece comes from, in part, because when you're talking about soul music, blah, 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 people are still talking about voice or things like that. And she kind of gets left behind in those conversations. Now with dance, I think that's crazy. But I think with the voice, I think definitely she gets left off those lists. She's never on those lists, maybe with sales.
But I think also too, the way, even as a community of, or as Black people, the way we read voice, if it's not bombastic, if it's not these kind of vocal pyrotechnics, so to speak, right, that in fact it's not good singing, right? But I mean, you can't beat Janet Jackson with harmony. You can't beat her. I mean, I'm serious, man. Harmonizing, Janet is like chef,
of course.
I mean, and I'm legit. But if it's not, like you said, if it's not, like you say, if you don't Aretha Franklin, you can't sing, basically.
Right.
But I think that's the same concept of Black women having archetypes, right? So, and there's just kind of these standard archetypes, and you've got to fit into one. And you're right, Janet Jackson didn't do that. Even when embracing sexuality, she didn't go all the way live with it. She didn't have, several songs that referenced, her parts with the P word, so you weren't all the way into that genre, and you weren't all the way, when we go, the best Black female singers, we're going to go, you're right, with your Patties and your Arethas and these particular kinds of started in the church and now I'm blowing out voices. And so you're right. Do we get this opportunity to create our own lane? To go into lanes, to reinvent ourselves and to do something different. And I can name a couple. I think there are a couple of Black male artists that have been able to do that. And when you were saying that, I was like, gosh, Black women really don't. We almost have to be careful about then what we launch ourselves as, because that is then our space forever. You know what I mean?
I also think of it, Dr. Bell, like you were saying, like I see Janet in a lot of ways, like if we look on the other side, right, in the pop side, the way we look at a Carly Simon or Joni Mitchell, who don't necessarily have the best voices, quote unquote. They're not Barbara Streisand, right? But still what they write and what they do, it works for them. And I think for Janet really, to me, right, works in that space, for me, crafting that lane for herself. Right? That she's trying to be these other people. You know what I mean? And I love it. You were talking about not all the way there, but I think about on Demita Joe, right, where she has the song Warmth and Moist, and one of them is her filleting the man, and then she said, oh, now it's my turn. And then it's about her being serviced. And it's like, she does those stuff. And interestingly enough, when people start kind of talking about her in those hypersexual terms, they don't look at it in this sense of this kind of empowerment of sexuality. They don't even talk about those songs, actually.
True.
Right?
They don't listen to her entire albums either. They don't listen to her entire albums.
No, they don't.
If you listen to her entire albums, you can't even make that argument. But Sarita Williams, Dr. Williams, who's at Augusta University, says Miss Jackson is certainly intentionally Black in her lyric sound and presentation. I'm reconsidering her career through the lens of Afrofuturism. She certainly looked to the past and pointed to our future. She's my Gary, Indiana Shiro, so I always rep for her. And Dr.
I can definitely see that, like in the Busta Rhymes video, for example. Her in terms of that Afrofuturism, I was, and even the Discipline album, for example, which is very much so, the interludes are Kyoko, right? That kind kind of like a Siri or Alexa thing, right? That she uses in the interludes, right? They really kind of speak to her engaging in that kind of Afrofuturistic type realm. Yeah.
And the Scream, I think the Scream video with Michael Jackson.
Yeah, that one too.
Definitely falls into that category.
That's what she would like to know, but she felt limited.
Yeah, where you're talking about looking at the present, thinking about the past and the future, her embrace of Sankofa. You know, she had the Sankofa tattoo. I had mine first, but she got her Sankofa. I have mine first. She got her Sankofa. I'm just saying,
that tattoo after Velvet Rope.
Exactly. But when she got the Sankofa symbol, which is an Adikra symbol that means reaching back to the past in order to go forward, like knowing your history, things of that nature. I think there's a lot of Afrofuturistic iconography in her work. And also in her visual. Miss Annette Phillips says harmony is very important. And Janet's mother's from Alabama and singing harmonies is very important in Alabama music. Thank you, Miss Phillips. Yes, Miss Annette.
Can we talk? We're talking about harmony, and the harmonies are there. You can't argue that. That is her thing. We don't talk enough about her slow jams and mid tempos, which to me are my favorite Janet Jackson songs.
Favorite one.
Right, like those songs are very important. And when I think at some point one of us maybe will write the book on sort of her artistry. But there's all of that, right? Those slow songs we don't talk about enough. And those mid tempos, like Funny How Time Flies is probably one of my favorite, all-time songs, period. Just of anyone.
For sure. Like Lonely on the Rhythm Nation album. That's the one. The one that I can't believe she didn't release that. But anyway.
Can't Be Good is a great song. Like there's so many.
What's the one that's on Feel So Right? That's on You is brilliant.
Right, Funny How Time Flies. I mean, she just got a lot of them. But she but we only have a few minutes left, so anybody has questions, please send them. But one of the things I do want to talk about before we hop off is this idea of, and I don't think Janet Jackson was canceled outside of the industry, particularly by a very specific set of fans, but this idea of cancel culture, because even with Timberlake's apology, there are people now who are calling for him to be canceled because he took so long, or this is just an opportunity because he's got his film coming out, and I think the film's already out. He's got a new album coming out, or he's just doing this because this is what woke people do, and like many what we call pretend allies do now is put out these statements of all these things they're going to do and how they've changed or what have you, as it relates to the treatment and historical treatment of Black people, or what have you. He says, and I'm just going to read it right here, I've seen the messages, tags, comments, and concerns, and I want to respond. I'm deeply sorry for the times in my life where my actions contributed to the problem, where I spoke out of turn or did not speak up for what was right. I understand that I fell short in these moments and many others, and benefited from a system that condones misogyny and racism. I specifically want to apologize to Britney Spears and Janet Jackson both individually, because I care for and respect these women, and I know I failed. I also feel compelled to respond in part because everyone involved deserves better, and most importantly, because this is a larger conversation that I wholeheartedly want to be a part of and grow from. So that's just an excerpt of the entirety of it.
That was a apology.
So I'm wondering.
Britney.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I
think it was a great one, really, even for her either, to be honest with you. A true apology is it's specific, and it needs to look like you understand the magnitude of what you did. So, the impact he had on both of these women in terms of their careers and their reputations, how they must have felt in terms of being betrayed by him in certain. I mean, it doesn't cover it. It would have had to have been specific. And he even says, "I'm going to apologize individually," but that wasn't an individual apology. Where's the individual apology?
I don't think in this current climate there is. I can't believe I'm going to defend him in any kind of way, but I don't think there's anything that he could have written in this current culture that would have been read as sincere anyway. I think that was the kind of thing that he probably should have got on the phone and called them and done that personally. And maybe we wouldn't have been the wiser unless they told us that he did it. But yeah, I don't think there is anything that he could have said at this point, particularly where Janet is concerned, that would have satisfied a whole lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. And I wonder, to Dr. Burton's point about cancel culture, often say this in my classes, and I say it to myself, if you look away from Twitter and Facebook, does it exist? Right? Like, where does the canceling happen? Because it's not happening in their bank accounts for most people. Some people they lose their jobs, their book deals, all that stuff. But for most people who are allegedly canceled, they're just getting talked about for a day, for a news cycle, and then it's over. Most of those people haven't really been canceled. And I wonder if you look away from Twitter for 48 hours, do you even know? For most people who are allegedly canceled. And I would argue that you don't, and that the people who probably need to be shut down aren't being shut down. We saw everybody getting book deals after their time in the presidency and all that other stuff, and then not getting the pressure to not give these people a platform until after a few people raised their voices. That was real work. But for the most part, it's people not liking someone say, "You're canceled. We're going to talk about you for a day," and then nothing. I think this is what social media does. This is what people are able to do. Sometimes that's for good in very rare instances. Mostly it's just talk, I think, in most cases. That doesn't do much of anything. It serves no purpose. But I get the term. It's a catchy term. I understand what it means. And I think people live in fear of it now. Right? Because everything we're doing lives forever. We're talking right now. One of us could have said something crazy by accident and it's forever. Right. And then it's a snippet. So we live in this world where everything we do is like we're on a reality show all day long. Right. Anything you say, anything you do. And it's frightening for people because they don't want people to talk about them so much. They might lose a check. You know what I'm saying?
And I think culture also doesn't have any context. Do you ever, you know what I mean? Like it's always like what you did right in this little snapshot. And so it's out of context. People know that I talk about this a lot when we talk about our vice president, but she was such a good example of that. Like, we take a snapshot of something that happened. I lived during that time where everybody thought the crime bill and everybody thought that going tough on criminals was a great idea. Right. I buried friends over shoes and stuff. And I'm 90s. So, if you didn't come from that, you can snapshot it and say, she was just going through the streets locking up black men. I mean, without knowing without context. And I think that cancel culture often lacks context. It often lacks the true meaning. Sometimes people need to be canceled. And I have canceled R. Kelly. Let's just get real clear. I have canceled R. Kelly. I know people don't like to use the word cancel. I'm from Chicago and I canceled him. Yes. So absolutely.
Probably long before that documentary.
There's a larger context. And I think sometimes what people are unwilling to do is to get educated around the entire context so they can make a decision for themselves. This is something I can support. This is something that I wouldn't. They just
requires reading
and roll,
That's what I was saying about that Britney Spears documentary that came on Hulu. Is everybody's like, Diane Sawyer should be canceled. I say, when Diane Sawyer interviewed her, those were the type of questions that reporters were asking. Those were the type of questions that people wanted to know. That people wanted to know if she was sleeping with Justin Timberlake, if she was and unfortunately it was a different time. And so you're right, in terms of context, people don't understand what the time period was and how things were being asked. And like somebody just mentioned here, she wasn't even in power in the 90s in the same way that she is now. And so now, like you say, people have kind of hopped onto these things now, this stuff, right? There's no new information that's being presented. And people are hopping on it and now they're outraged, right? But I think in some respects, and back to our discussion about in terms of Janet was in fact canceled. Absolutely, in fact, was canceled, right?
By corporate industry.
By corporate media, she was canceled. And I remember Laura Bush making comments about her and had no clue. And the fact remains, right, is that the Super Bowl video, the only reason we saw it was because it was repeatedly played in the media. If you were watching the Super Bowl at the time, it was a blip. You could barely even settle on what had happened. But they
had TiVo.
And that's what led to that. But you know what I'm saying? But people were pausing it and doing but you see what I'm saying? That people
But Matt Drudge, I'm glad you brought that up because Matt Drudge built his career. That was the first thing that blew Matt Drudge up. He's the person who blew that photo up, and that's what I wrote about back then. Because I was like, you didn't even see it. You weren't mad because you didn't care. Those who do love Janet Jackson and have worshipped the ground that she walks on were actually quite happy about it. And I said, you all didn't care until Matt Drudge blew that photo up 7 times or however many times, I can't remember what it was. and then said, "Oh, this is a horrible thing that Janet Jackson did. You know, we must do something about this." If this was CBS, and I tease CBS and sometimes call them the Christian Broadcast Service because of the shows they had on back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But CBS has good programming. Like, don't cancel me. But we didn't even know who Matt Drudge. Most people outside of the media did not know who Matt Drudge
who
was.
he was, right?
And then when he blew up that photo, and that made it a big deal. And was like, did you all see this, or has this happened? And then that we agree with you. Janet Jackson is amazing and great, absolutely. Miss Annette. But when Matt Drudge did that, he built a whole career that is still standing to this day. The Drudge Report. Based on that one picture. So yeah, she was canceled. But what's interesting to me about this is that she was canceled, but so many white men in general, white people specifically, were able to launch and really elevate their careers on the back of what happened to her.
Exactly.
And that's what makes what happened to her so problematic and troubling. So yeah, in effect, she still had us. Of course, she still has us. But she was effectively canceled by corporations.
Who was it that came up with the term? Was it Timberlake that used the term wardrobe malfunction first?
I believe it was.
In one of his
in his press release
that he said, and then and then now that's part of the kind of the popular culture lexicon now. I hate wardrobe malfunction. I hate that word. Those words. But yeah,
and Charles Cobb. Right, and Charles Cobb, who's been just dropping science over here in the chat, says, then after that, they did not have black artists for years.
No, they didn't.
So,
They didn't.
They did have Justin Timberlake back.
But did have Justin
Timberlake. Yes, they did bring him back.
He's the one that did the pulling. She didn't.
That's right. So in closing, last statements about this particular incident, or whatever you want to say about Janet Jackson. 10 seconds or less, Mark.
Oh God, you gonna start with me?
Okay, 10 seconds or less, Kanika.
I got one for you. That's my forever honey. That's all I'm gonna say. That's my forever honey, man. Janet Jackson can do no wrong to me, man. She can do no wrong.
I'm just going to shout out Janet for FaceTiming the gymnast and making her entire life. I just felt like that's what I'm going to shout Janet out for. I can't pronounce her name. Is it Marcusette? I don't want
to mess it up.
I'm so sorry. You are routine.
So for those who don't know, this black gymnast did a bomb routine for Janet Jackson.
Medley of Janet Jackson songs. Janet Jackson FaceTimed her and said, "I would love to learn how to tumble." It was just so humble. She was like, "I know I'd be a hot mess, but I would absolutely love to have you." The girl was crying absolutely because her idol called her, and I thought that was just black women magic. So that is what I'll say in my last 10 seconds.
Yes.
I'll just say Janet is still here, right? She's still releasing music. She's still relevant, still doing the work. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Yeah.
All right. And I'll end with Janet Jackson is literally everything. So there's nothing you can do to take her down as long as we are alive. And that would be the black community. Just like Sweet Back Badass starring the black community. We are starring the black community. We got your back, Janet. And you're going to never be canceled for us. So with that in mind, thank you so much, Dr. Cunningham, Dr. Phill, Professor Phill Branch, storyteller extraordinaire, Goucher College, Austin Community College, Clark Atlanta University, Emory University. Thank you so much for joining me for this most important talk about the policing of Black women's bodies through the lens of the icon, the legend, Damita Jo Jackson.
Hey, Mama Burton, I saw your hand.
I did. I saw your mom on there. I was like,
hey, Mom. My mom is always on it.
I love it.
She got my back. She got my back.
All right. It was good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.